I was disgusted by those Democrats who wouldn't stand up. And Sean, you're right. This isn't a Republican thing. These are American stories, heartwarming, heartfelt stories of real people facing real challenges that have overcome them. You can't stand up for a woman who suffered brain damage because of a sporting event. You had a man participate in women. No, of course not, because then that would be a tacit acknowledgement that men shouldn't play women's sports. But I mean, the cancer kid, that come on.
They would just enter this with, a human brain and just think about it as regular people and try to act normal. You could say, okay, well, we're not going to applaud for the policies we don't agree with or the jabs he might take at us, but we can applaud for the things that everybody agrees with.
We know that gender ideology was toxic to voters at the ballot box, and the Democrats are still digging in their heels and claiming to be the party of women. Nobody's buying it anymore.
All right, guys, it is official. 9,900 words, 100 minutes. For everyone who thought I put that poll out on Twitter, over 80 minutes, under 80 minutes, he blew it away. He wasn't kidding when he said he was going to leave the Capitol at 11:10 last night. He broke the record for a presidential address to Congress. He even beat President Clinton's State of the Union, which was, I think, 88 minutes or something in that ballpark. But he had a lot to say, a lot to go on. By the way, you noticed Doug Collins, our guest from Monday, was the designated survivor. I don't know if you saw that or not, but maybe we had something to do with it. I don't know. Maybe they wanted to keep Doug away. Tomorrow, Bill O'Reilly's on the show. We have a great panel. You're coming away to break it all down with some insights you're not going to see anywhere else. Before I get to that, Reagan said it best. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It's not passed down in the bloodstream. It has to be fought for and protected and handed down. That's what President Trump was talking about last night, and that's why those words are no more relevant than they are today than they were when Reagan said them. We are preparing the next generation to lead, to be able to fight. Enter the Great American Leadership Program, a one-of-a-kind summit by the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Middle schoolers, high schoolers, and families can all dive into American values, sharpen their leadership skills, and literally walk in President Reagan's footsteps in his library in sunny Southern California. If you haven't been there, I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. This is a program like no other. It's not your typical summer camp. Imagine crisis scenarios involving the Oval Office and military commanders. It's unbelievable. Even members of the press, you get to figure out how you would jar with them. Fireside chats, you name it. Spots are limited for this summer camp. Don't miss the chance to lead with purpose. Use code SPICER25 to save 25%. It expires on March 15th, so get to do this now. Go to the ReaganFoundation.org/summer and use that code SPICER25. Freedom isn't guaranteed. It's only passed on when we exhibit leadership. That's what this is going to teach you. All right. If you are the person that runs your organization or does the finances, do what I do. I joined Ramp. It is an expense accounting software. It looks like a Visa card. You get virtual and physical cards issued to you. It takes like 15 minutes to sign up. You have some paperwork, and you can immediately start enjoying the benefits of Ramp. It saves you so much time and money. One of the guests on the show said that his company switched over, and it was unbelievable. It manages expense receipts. You're not chasing around employees. It takes care of so much busy work. And literally, some people are saying that it saves them 20% of their day. It flips the equation. It's a free corporate card that handles all those tedious financial operations, and it integrates directly with all of your other systems. It gives you complete control, unlike anything else. Saves you so much time, and you get this concierge white glove service to help you through any of the hurdles that you might have. And for a limited time, listeners of the show get $250 when you join Ramp. Just go to ramp.com/Spicer, ramp.com/Spicer. Cards are issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC, terms and conditions apply. All right, it is my pleasure to introduce our all-star panel to break down not just what the Republicans did, but unfortunately how bad the Democrats were last night. Hogan Gidley, a political strategist, he was the former deputy principal press secretary in the Trump White House and the lead spokesman for the Trump 2020 campaign. Dylan Hausman is the editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller, and our old friend Caroline Downey is a staff writer at the National Review and a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Guys, good to see you all. Let's just go around the horn because, Hogan, I want to get into some specifics with you about the night. I know you were there. You're working with Speaker Johnson. But just give me your initial thoughts, what you thought of the speech. Hogan, I'll start with you.
Structurally, I really liked it because what Donald Trump did was he started off with the accomplishments. And what's fascinating was in 4 weeks, he was able to rattle off more accomplishments that improved the lives of Americans than Joe Biden could after 4 years. So that was very intriguing to me. In addition, he used the crowd and his guests to incredible effect with someone who had suffered brain injury because a man had played women's sports, with a kid who was diagnosed with terminal cancer 5 years. He's still fighting that battle. Girls who had been mistreated by AI, making them appear in all types of ridiculously lewd scenes online. In addition, the capture and bringing back of the person, the mastermind behind the terrorist action at Abbey Gate that killed 13 of our service members. Incredible move on his part. And then ending the speech with the lofty goals of what we're going to try to achieve with the America First agenda and ushering back in a renaissance of the American dream. Those things were all fascinating. I know we're going to get to the Democrats because I can't wait to get on that. But I think overall the speech was really good. And really spoke to, it wasn't a speech for the mainstream media. It was a speech for the people, and it delivered.
Yeah, and the Insta polls show it. We'll talk about that. Plus, I do want to get into the props, the people, because I think that was you're absolutely right. You're so brilliant. Dillian, when you guys were covering at the Daily Caller, what were the big takeaways and themes that you guys pushed out?
Well, the first thing was that it really flew by, in my opinion. Trump tends to give long speeches. We've talked about how long this one was, and it was very lengthy. But when I looked down at my own clock last night after watching it, I didn't even realize how much time had gone by. I thought it really flowed well, and it kind of didn't feel like it was a 2-hour speech, even though it was getting to that level of length. So that was the one thing I noticed. Then the other, Hogan just talked about the guests that were there, and I don't want to get too much into the Democrat reaction because that's coming later, but Trump's use of the people there to highlight their stories, to make these heartfelt moments come to life in the room, and then juxtapose that with the Democrats' reactions to it, in some case lack of reaction, I think was a really smart strategic move to kind of highlight what they're doing and what they're reacting to.
Caroline, to Dylan's point, I didn't realize it was a 2-hour speech until I looked. There was nothing that was like the slow part. Like, in a movie, sometimes it drags. I felt like I was captivated the whole time. And I was trying to stay in touch with the chat on the line, and people would sometimes say, "Are you still there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm captivated by the speech." What was it that stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, it kept a ton of momentum the whole way through. It was in his signature style, which was this combination of some prompter, but also riffing. And the riffing that he did do was extremely comedic. And I'll say what I think this speech had was something for everyone. It had the comedic value because obviously there was plenty of humor packed into that, unless, of course, you're the stodgy Democrats that just want to frown at everything. And it was also extremely emotional. And, Hogan mentioned all those powerful testimonies. And the thing about the testimonies, it's that it was wonderful to highlight these individuals as examples of this administration's accomplishments so far or the detriments of the last administration. But, the mainstream media and Democrats try so hard to dehumanize Trump, to make him seem like this unempathetic, tyrant that's unfeeling. But I noticed through many of those stories, you could tell he feels like this is personal. He said something to the effect of, "We will always remember our beautiful Laken Riley." He said something about Corey Comperatore. He's never going to forget that guy. And the fact that he was able to not only say them by name, but you could tell like there's something very personal to him about their tragedies and why they were allowed to happen under Democratic rule. Biden was at best disconnected from the public. These were pretend empaths, and that's what the Democrats are time and time again. Is they don't actually care about women's rights or women's success in America because those females in pink on the other side of the aisle voted against the bill that would protect women's sports. Laken Riley, that was an intentional policy choice that the Biden administration allowed to happen by opening the floodgates and allowing illegal alien criminals in. So it's like the juxtaposition between what we thought was the blue party of empathy and compassion is actually the complete opposite. And Trump, I think, emerged as not only the guy who can boast about a lot of policy accomplishments, but as the one who truly cares.
Hogan, before we keep going, I knew that you worked with Speaker Johnson and that you were there last night. And I couldn't help the second that I saw Al Green get up and Speaker Johnson get him booted out. I was like, okay, I got it. I said on Twitter, Speaker Johnson just did like what the kids call a boss move, because he was ready for it. And so just bring us inside for a second. There's no, I mean, Johnson was on his game last night, and he was like, you know, it's like a dad yelling at a kid. You do it one more time and you're in your room. And last night Johnson executed. He was like, all right. And I watched the side, the sergeant at arms, I don't know if they call them officers or official, kind of goes down the Democratic side, and he was standing there waiting. And it was almost like, all right, Congressman Green, you go further, we're sending you your room. And sure enough, Johnson was like, boom, you're out. Right. How was that? Like, what did you guys do to plan and war game that out?
Well, look, first of all, he was a parent, but more like a Republican parent, because he says, do it one more time, and then we're getting you out. And then he got you out. There were no timeout. No, we're gonna put you in timeout for 15 minutes. We're gonna wait. We're not gonna. He was ready for that. Look, I think the rumors and the speculation and the plans were kind of permeating throughout the House yesterday, with Democrats saying, here's what we're going to do. We've got all these big plans to get out there and disrupt the speech. And I think the speaker understood the gravity of the moment. I think he understood that Donald Trump had the mic and the American people were listening. It was his first time back to Congress since the previous term, and they wanted to hear it. And he wasn't going to let something derail that. And if you notice,
but Hogan, like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like Johnson was ready. Like,
I know he
had,
was.
and to interrupt the president, right, is takes a lot. Like, you don't know, does Donald Trump like that? Does he not like that? Is it the right time? And Johnson was pitch perfect. Did you guys rehearse any of that?
I don't want to get too far deep into the weeds or behind the curtain on what happened on our side. I will say, though, you know, you don't do much in this building without the blessing of the president. You know what I mean? And knowing the disruption was coming, you got to be prepared to make a move. And Speaker
But you
Johnson,
war gamed it, right? I mean, it's not. I don't think it's a secret.
Oh yeah, you don't just these things rarely happen where, you know, you just spur of the moment. I mean, we knew something was coming, and I think Johnson was ready for it. He took the appropriate action. Now I think there's even a move to censure him, the Congressman Al Green, and I think that's coming too.
Well, I mean, look, I'm sorry. I felt like the thing that was interesting to me, Dylan, right, is that he gets up there and afterwards we find out that he was yelling about, you don't have a mandate to cut Medicare. And I'm like, Medicaid. And I was like, wait a second. He didn't cut Medicaid. There is no cuts to Medicaid. Right. So you guys look like a bunch of bozos because you actually are protesting something that's not even happening. And I felt like this was like unbelievably foolish. Did you guys, I have not checked the Daily Caller. How did you guys handle the outburst? Because Politico, God bless him, wrote that he was ejected from the thing as if like somehow he was the victim.
Well, we like to write what actually happens. So we wrote that he was interrupting the speech and screaming like a maniac, and then got kicked out, which is pretty appropriate, I think.
Which is what happened.
Which is exactly what happened. And I think the whole episode was really emblematic of the state of the Democratic Party at the moment. There's a lot of pundits that would tell you it's easier to be an opposition party than it is to be governing and actually have to get stuff done. But Democrats are really putting that theory to the test. They don't have a unified message. I mean, the fact he was shouting about Medicare and Medicaid and cutting that when the Republicans have said repeatedly that's not what they're going to do, and I think we all know it would be politically harmful to do, and they're not going to. The fact that that seems to be the message that they're grasping for is really telling that they don't have much else. And, you know, we saw that leadership reportedly was telling people not to protest, to not make fools of themselves, to not make a scene, and yet a bunch of their members were unable to do that and went out and just went rogue and had to, you know, try to hog the cameras for themselves. And I think it really shows that there's this disconnect within their party right now. They don't know how to handle Trump and how to oppose him in a way that's effective right now, and they're really just grasping for whatever they can.
Can I say Caroline, you go ahead, Hogan.
Just real quick. Sorry, Caroline, I don't want to jump on here, but if Democrats want to make the face of their resistance a 77-year-old congressman with a cane, literally personifying the meme of an old man shouting at clouds.
It's much younger than their last face. For the record.
It had the element of, get off my lawn, Mr. Trump.
I know. It just be my guest. It was clear in the room too. After they started physically removing the man, Congressman Green, no Democrats really protested that either. They didn't hoot and holler. It was just kind of like, all right, you know. I mean, they were so deadpan the entire time, which I know we're going to get to, but you know, even they were like, all right, just let him go. Like it.
Caroline, 8 years ago, whatever it was, Joe Wilson stood up and yelled, "You lie" to Barack Obama. and the world went nuts. I mean, it was, he has to apologize. The morning shows led with it. No coverage that I can see in the left-wing legacy media this morning about the spectacle of the Democrats last night.
No, they are refusing to acknowledge just how disruptive and petulant this behavior was. Very unbecoming of sitting members of the legislature, lack total decorum. And, to both your points, if they wanted to prove that they are now the party of stodgy scolds where old man yells at cloud is like the vignette of choice and they're going to have bingo placards, well, they sealed it. They sealed the brand. Like, that's done. And it was really silly, shenanigans the whole way through. And what I will say, when it comes to the Medicaid thing, I think this is part of the, Elon Musk becoming the boogeyman of this administration so far, which I think has been politically advantageous to Trump in many ways, because he's taken a lot of arrows for Trump, even though he's literally not in the government technically, at least in the formal cabinet way. So, Elon Musk, he's an accounting guy, and he has said, I don't know how much DOGE can do if we don't look at entitlements. Is that the same as saying we're going to abolish or make significant cuts to these programs? No. But they're definitely using that as ammunition, because Elon Musk, he recognizes that our fiscal house is in bad shape, and he's proposed ways to help that. And I'm sure Democrats just were ready to pounce, and they're applying that to Trump, who never ran on that.
Dylan, I mean, I think that overall, like, Al Green aside, their response last night, Hogan alluded to this. When a kid with cancer, when we're sitting there applauding, his fight against cancer and how we need to address childhood cancer, or whatever, and the Democrats sit down, can't clap. When we hear the story of Corey Comperatore getting killed, when we hear the story about a young woman getting a traumatic brain injury because a man hit her in the head, and on and on and on. All of these, a young man getting his acceptance into West Point right there, something that we should all embrace. That wasn't a Trump thing. That wasn't a Republican thing. It wasn't a conservative thing. Those are all American things. And I was embarrassed for the Democratic Party last night, because they couldn't stand and just say, okay, we don't like Trump, I get it, but we can love America, and we can love the challenges and the feats and the accomplishments of these individuals. And it was, to me, a huge contrast that our country faces right now. This was sort of like reminiscent of the election. There are a lot of people who said, I was never Trump, and I came over because the Democratic Party has lost their way so much. And last night, to me, was the visualization, the manifestation of that, where these guys couldn't even stand for a kid with cancer.
Yeah, usually after a side loses an election, it causes some level of reflection, maybe some change, some thought of how do we shift things and go a different direction and try to win people back. And it doesn't seem to be happening at all so far. They seem to be locked in this partisan brain mentality where, anything Trump says is wrong. We can't applaud any of it. We can't go along with any of it. But if they would just enter this with, a human brain and just think about it as regular people and try to act normal, you could say, okay, well, we're not going to applaud for the policies we don't agree with or the jabs he might take at us, but we can applaud for the things that everybody agrees with, for the kid with cancer getting honored, for the renaming of things after victims of illegal migrant crime. We can applaud for these things that everybody should agree with. And the fact that they can't even bring themselves to do that shows that I don't think they've really grappled with the fact that they did lose to Donald Trump, that he did win the popular vote, and that they did suffer this massive defeat, and that they are going to have to change, and they can't just keep going business as usual. But right now it seems that's what they're doing, and they keep picking fights on stupid issues like the women and women's sports and protecting women's sports from biological men. That's an 80-20 issue.
Yeah.
80% of the country, but more than that, probably agrees with it, and yet they're taking the strong minority position, and it's just politically stupid, and they don't seem to be waking up to that reality yet.
Yeah. The CBS poll afterwards said that 76% of people who watched it approved of the speech. And this goes right along with that's almost 80%, 80-20. They're still in that 20%, which is just so dumb, as you point out, politically for them. And I remember in the first administration, Sean, as most times he gave a speech at the well, in the House of Representatives, he got 80% approval of those who watched it. The people who just saw the news coverage gave him like 30% approval, which shows the sieve of bias that they try to make you view his comments through. But I got to tell you, I was absolutely furious. I was disgusted by those Democrats who wouldn't stand up. And Sean, you're right. this isn't a Republican thing. These are American stories, heartwarming, heartfelt stories of real people facing real challenges that have overcome them. You can't stand up for a woman who suffered brain damage because of a sporting event. You had a man participate with it. No, of course not, because then that would be a tacit acknowledgement that men shouldn't play women's sports. But I mean, the cancer kid, that come on, getting an honorary Secret Service detail recognition. Things like that are so sweet. And the young man who's now going to the military academy. I mean, how do you not stand up and cheer for that? It was a really bad look for them. The paddles were stupid. But again, when you don't win presidential elections, we know you don't really have a North Star. You don't have a compass because you don't have someone leading the party, and you flounder for a little bit. But these folks have chosen not just to flounder, but to double down in support of, advocating for fraud, waste, and abuse in the government. I mean, Republicans have been so smart so far. Democrats are on the wrong side of the plastic versus paper straw debate. They're taking all of the wrong positions.
You know, Caroline, I think, you know, to Hogan's point, you guys, I know you're part of the Independent Women's Forum, and last night was a big win. Riley Gaines is sitting there, the volleyball player. Like, he really exposed the divisions, and he campaigned on this issue, how this woke mentality, this lowest common denominator policy of figuring out what the least of us needs and then making everyone else abide by it. This was a big night for women last night, I think, to call out. You had these women, you noted this, Caroline, they're wearing pink to support women, and yet they, the day before, had just voted to keep men and women's sports.
It's so rich. It really is. And that, to Hogan's point, is an 80-20 issue. We know that gender ideology was toxic to voters at the ballot box, and the Democrats are still digging in their heels and claiming to be the party of women. Nobody's buying it anymore. And Payton McNabb, you know, Trump gave a really great background as to what happened to her when she was literally pummeled in the head by a male opponent on the other team. But she's still suffering mental and physical injuries to this day. She's taken out of the arena permanently. I mean, like, talk about disenfranchisement. And again, the Democrats, what they showed yesterday was petty tribalism. You know, because in my opinion, they don't view us as a nation. They feel no kinship toward their fellow American or citizens. They will put foreigners and a fringe minority, men who think they're women, above the vast majority of American people every single time. And they desperately need a reset, but I don't know if that's coming anytime soon. We saw how they cheered for the Ukraine aid, and that was it. And I just
and they still sat, by the way. They still sat. They were sitting on their hands and wearing gold. I mean, yellow and blue. All right, but I want to get into the guest because Hogan brought them up. You guys, we've all talked about him. But before I do that, you guys, you know that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth posted on his X account a couple weeks ago that he had been targeted by the Biden IRS. He had been targeted by them for an audit, which is completely random. He just suddenly got, nominated to be Secretary of Defense, and there you go. Anybody can have that happen to them. And it's scary because the full weight of the federal government comes down on you. So if you have back taxes, unfiled returns, or know someone who does, trust me, you're going to need help. Do not think that you can navigate this by yourself. The full weight of the federal government is behind the IRS. They are looking to find as much money as they can, especially ahead of these DOGE cuts. So get ahead of this move. Contact the best in the business. I trust the people at Tax Network USA. They have a preferred direct line to the IRS. They have years of experience, know which agents you can work with, which agents you shouldn't work with, and they will handle all that for you. They will take away the nasty calls, the nasty letters and emails that you get from the IRS and advocate on your behalf. But better than advocate on their behalf, they've recovered over $1 billion for their clients because they're really good at what they do. They know who they can deal with, how to navigate the situation. They've proven strategies to get your money back and to protect you. So you can talk with one of their strategists for free. Stop all those letters, looking over your shoulder, wondering what the IRS is going to do. Just call them at 1-800-905-8000, 1-800-905-8000, or go to TNUSA, that's Tax Network, TNUSA.com/Sean Spicer. One full word. It's like Madonna. Sean Spicer, no spaces, no nothing. TNUSA.com/Spicer. All right. Dylan, you guys are the Daily Caller. Reagan Reese was the first to break the story about some of the First Lady's guests. We've talked about them. I gotta say, of all of the State of the Unions that I watched, it was hands down the best use of guests to exemplify policies and issues going forward. When you guys look at this from a Daily Caller perspective, do you just incorporate them into the story? Do you think some get called out and others don't? I mean, how do you guys navigate all those different guests?
I think the thing to keep in mind is that you kind of alluded to this just now, that these guests, they represent real policy outcomes. They represent real things that happen to real people. And that's why they're so powerful. And so we try to tell stories that affect regular Americans, things that are going to impact their lives, not things that just the DC elite care about. And all of the people that were there last night pretty much were, victims essentially, or affected in some way by policy choices that lawmakers, that presidents have made. And it showed how it negatively affected their lives and why it's important. We have a lot of aloofness in this country sometimes, and kind of nihilism that, politics, it's all broken, it's all screwed up, it doesn't matter, whatever, none of it matters. These people's stories show why it does matter, because if certain policy choices hadn't been made and certain things have been done differently, some of these people wouldn't have been victimized in the way that they were. And so I think that's why it was such a powerful rhetorical device, and why it made such an impact, is because Trump is basically using these stories of these people to say, look, this is what happens when you make these kind of policy choices, and these are the reasons why I'm going to do things differently.
Hogan, I was thinking about last night when I was talking about all the guests, and this from your work at the White House, and I know it from my, the one dream dress I worked on, the amount of time that's spent on the guests, and then how do you incorporate them into the speech? I got to tell you, last night blew my mind. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, this person's sitting up there in the box or whatever.
Right.
Caroline alluded to this, but he told a personal story about each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And as they were kind of coming in, I saw the First Lady's announcement early in the day, who she was coming in. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Or, okay, I get the volleyball player and Mark Fogel from Russia. But it came to life last night in a very powerful way. And I just thought to myself, the Sean Curran thing, for example. Sean Curran was the Secret Service agent, soon to be director, who hugged that little boy DJ. And I've known Sean Curran for 10 years.
Yep.
And I thought to myself, how does a story like that turn out like this? Because I just thought to myself, did someone walk in and say, Mr. President, we got this idea. You're talking about childhood cancer and the stuff that Bobby's doing, and there's this kid and he's law enforcement, Curran. That literally was like a producer that had, I was blown away.
Well, oftentimes, as the theatrics of politics fall very flat. They don't work. They're goofy. This one was just a perfect symbiosis, if you will, of the policy, how it affects people, as we were just talking about. But in those rooms, when you're starting to build out each section of the speech, each policy section, each accomplishment section, you do look at the guests. And what's unique about Trump, as is he's so good at these moments and in these times. To talk about signing an executive order or the creation of a park for Laken Riley, and then to have
and
it
then
there,
chew
turn
it
around
there,
and get
I
it
know.
and show it. It reminded me on Inauguration Day, presidents do their thing around town, then they go to Oval Office, they may sign something in the Oval Office. He signed executive orders in front of the crowd that would have been out front in the arena.
Wait, so last night, hold on. You were there last night. Did that executive order get signed with her family?
And I don't know. I don't know if that was done before. It seemed like it was a surprise to them the way
Yeah,
I
I
took
know.
it. And I was sitting with some of the speechwriters too, and they were like, "Hey, get ready." He wrote a good line here. Get ready. He did this little part.
It was so authentic. I knew that between him and the dude who got into West Point, neither one of them seemed to have a clue.
No, it looked like a surprise for those people, which I'm sure will come out sooner or later. But he knows how to capitalize on those moments. And again, taking the heartfelt story and telling it's one thing. To have the face of the person that's directly affected by it, by your action, takes it to a whole nother level. And anybody watching that speech, how you're not extremely moved by the stories he was telling and how he wove them into what he wanted to do for the country, what he's already done for the country. It really was a masterclass in how to communicate with the American people.
Caroline, it was like I said, every one of them, one after one, I kept going, there's no way you can outdo that. And then it would be like, okay, the next story. And I was like, oh boy, I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, I mean, I just get emotional thinking about just that one, Laken Riley Park. I mean, it's one thing to pay lip service to the victims of the Biden regime. It is another to commemorate in that hyper-personal way with their families, standing ovation, to create some lasting like landmark or institution that will always be a reminder to them that they did not die in vain. And just to have the Democrats sitting there knowing that this was the collateral damage of Biden's policies. And as I said before, Trump will never let them forget it. And I think that's what's distinct about him. And I mean, many Republican presidents, they had effective, good policy. But the way that Trump, as Hogan said, uses theatrics to pull on our heartstrings, and we come away from that feeling like, wow, these are people that could have been our own families. And it was just profoundly moving from start to finish. And there was also some zingers, lines that they weren't necessarily emotive, but they were powerful. And speaking of the illegal immigration issue, one that I think was the mic drop of the night, hands down, was, and I'm quoting verbatim.
I want to see it. Hold on. How many, Dylan, do you think you got this?
I know what it is.
No, I think I know what it is. So Caroline, go.
Okay. Democrats told us we needed legislation to secure the border. Turns out we just needed a new president.
It's so perfect.
Dylan, did you agree? Was that
I agree. We wrote a column yesterday afternoon about this, that this is something he needs to highlight. And so as soon as he said that, I was like pointing at my screen, like that's it right there. That proves the whole thing wrong.
I tip my hat to the speechwriter because,
when the excerpts came out, I tweeted that right away. I was like, that is it.
That's the idea.
And it's, but the thing is that is so, it encapsulates the thing. The other day I read this story, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, and it talked about how these caravans of people are turning around, right? They're turning around because they know that if they come, and to me, that was the exemplification of what's happening now, is that you realize there's a reason there aren't as many protests on campus about Gaza anymore. Not that the issue is solved, because they know that this president isn't going to tolerate it. There's a reason that people are turning around. Caroline.
Can I just make one point about why that line was so powerful? In addition to that, embedded in it is the understanding that the Democrats were actually engaged in an open conspiracy against the public because they flouted federal law the entire time. They said, we just need more funding. We just need more resources. No. Federal law says you have to detain and process illegal aliens before you deport them. You didn't do that. In fact, you invented new loopholes to make it easier for unvetted foreign populations to pour into this country, knowing they could be criminals like Jose Ibarra. So actually, it's much deeper than that.
Yes.
It's that the Democrats knew what they were doing all along. It was intentional anarchy.
It wasn't by accident, it was by design. And that line really did go to expose that, not to mention the fact leading up to it, the lies that were told by the left. We had to have a bill. You can't do this to the executive branch. You have to have a bill for this to happen. And we knew that wasn't true at the time. The press went along with it and said, Donald Trump stopped this bill, blah, blah, blah. You didn't need that. What you need to do is follow federal law, Caroline. You're absolutely right. And the Democrats refused to do that on purpose. And it was premeditated for a whole host of reasons. But in addition to that, Donald Trump comes in, does the exact opposite. And what do you expect to happen? The spigot gets shut off. People don't come into this country illegally. You don't have the rapes and the murders and the burglaries and the assaults that you had from illegal aliens committed that are 100% preventable because they didn't have the right to be here in the first place. Donald Trump stopped it. And within 4 weeks, he can already show you measurable success, measurable progress that has closed the southern border and started to give us a sane, rational border policy. The line embedded in it was so much to watch the left squirm in that moment because, as I said, they lied to us the whole time. They knew they had the opportunity to fix it, and they tried to blame somebody else for their failure or for their, on purpose move. And Trump just called them out. It was great.
Dylan, the other thing that I thought I loved, and this is, Caroline touched on this, when he talked about DOGE, the humor, the way that he addressed it he was like, there's $5 million going to a trans thing in Ireland. Don't think that's going to help the jig. I mean, it was so, the way he sold it, the outrage was like, it was just the Democrats, I think, couldn't stand the fact that he was calling out, which is basically their wasteful spending. But he did it in such a funny way. He didn't just read a list. The execution of it was, and the delivery was what sold it.
Yeah, pour one out for Lesotho, first of all, who apparently nobody's ever heard of. That was my favorite line of the night, I think. It was that little
Oh,
clip.
I was waiting for the outrage. You can't tell me that when he said
Sean,
that, I was
there
just
will
like,
be stories in the next few days, 100% of here's the reaction of the people of Africa who had their country insulted by Trump and how much they're crying about it. The New York Times or WAPO, somebody's going to run that story. It's going to be
100%.
glorious. But no, the humor was great, and I think the something that happened in the election is what it harkened back to me, which is that Republican communicators would say, if you talk to them leading up to election day, that some of the stuff the left is supporting is so out there and is so extreme that you almost can't call it out directly because people will think you're making it up.
It's
People will
right.
think you're exaggerating. People will think it's, some harebrained conspiracy theory.
Right.
And so it really brought me back to that, because as Trump is laying the stuff out that all this money is getting spent on, that's what it sounds like. It's like we're spending millions of dollars to put on plays to make people accept the gay community in Asia. Like, what's happening here? But it is real. It is real. It is happening. And I think the way that Trump delivers it is super effective and really makes the mockery of it that it should be. And people don't think these things are reasonable uses of government funds. They do think they're ridiculous. And so it's refreshing to have a politician treat them as such. And I think that really connects with people.
The thing that I find so funny, Caroline, is that last night the media really wants to break Trump and Elon apart, and that, how long is Elon going to last? And last night, I've viewed this all along, that Trump loves it. Elon's the heat shield right now. And last night, the president acknowledged the work that he's doing, called him out. I think the media just doesn't understand how important eradicating waste, fraud, abuse, inefficiencies, and duplicity is to the conservative base. I've been waiting decades for this. And if Elon makes some mistakes along the way or isn't as precise or surgical as I might like, he's got a long leash.
Totally. And Elon Musk, as I said, is kind of an accounting whiz. He slashed 80% of the deadweight workforce at Twitter before he turned it into X. He has a record of promoting efficiency and the bottom line in companies as, I don't know, like the richest man in the world. So, and I've said before on many networks, we need to apply that private sector mentality to government. Companies, I used to work in finance. My mom was on Wall Street. These companies go through booms and busts. They go through restructuring, mergers and acquisition, efficiency and productivity checks, performance reviews, some might say, maybe an email asking what you did this week. That could happen in a company. And we don't freak out into hysterics and say, how dare you say, actually, my job is on the line. And let me just prove that I'm worth something here. I'm valuable at this firm. In government, it's like the civil service thinks they're immune from that.
That's right.
And I think that's been the most valuable learning lesson of Elon Musk, is showing how much government thinks of itself as this permanent force that's unaccountable to the public. The only reason anyone has job security in the bureaucracy is because we, the taxpayer, afford it to them. That's unfair. And so DOGE has been an experiment that I think will be remembered for centuries to come, truly, because it's never really happened before.
And by the way, you're exposing basically what amounts to a progressive slush fund. That's what it is. Because you remember on social media, as everyone I'm sure has experienced this, the algorithms or the glitches always ended up silencing or shadow banning, censoring Republicans, right? It never went the other way. Have you noticed every dollar we found, did any of those dollars go to a pro-border security group or a pro-life group or a pro-Second Amendment group? No, it's all to the leftist woke ideologies. That's the problem. And in the South, we have a saying, we got a lot of them, but this is one of my favorites. You throw a rock over the fence and it's the hit dog that yelps. USAID immediately started yelping and freaking out because you knew you'd struck a nerve at that point, because they realized that's where they were funneling all their money to different crazy things overseas, but here at home too. And exposing that is a big problem. Now, I will say the two words I'm focused on for this administration: transparency, which we're seeing in spades, but also accountability. Who gets held accountable? Either fired, and we're seeing a lot of that too, or put on trial for crimes against the country, for heaven's sakes. These are things that the American people want to see because we've long suspected a lot of problems in the government with the way they spend our money. The shrimp on the treadmill is an old one that we've all seen for years, but now we're finding out the depth of it. And Donald Trump in his first term, and we were talking about this morning with some other folks in Congress, they would subpoena things, they would try to hold hearings, but there was no one from inside giving you the information. Elon Musk has the experience, the expertise, the algorithms to go, here are the books open, here's the money. What are we going to do about it? Now it's incumbent on Congress and the president and others to kind of take the action. But the more we see, the more you realize just how much we've been taken for fools for the last several years.
Yeah, and I love how the Dems will say, well, it's only $1 billion and it's only this. And I'm like, that's so disrespectful to the tax dollar and the taxpayer. Who cares if it's $100, $100,000, $100 million? At some point, the mentality of Washington that we don't care how much your tax dollars are is the problem with the Democratic Party. But I want to actually talk about something that I was interested in the speech that came up so late, which is Ukraine. And, you know, Dylan, you said this about how the speech kept going. And at one point I thought, wow, we're an hour and a half in and he hasn't talked about Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then it was like as if brilliance just kind of seeps in and he goes, I got a letter from Zelensky. And this is, and it was like, and where I think the media gets this wrong, and Hogan knows this from working with him, Donald Trump wants peace. That's it, full stop. He is so proud of the fact that there was not an incursion on his watch during his 4 years, a land grab, a war, whatever, right? And he actually was winding down Afghanistan. He wants peace. And so last night, he, I think, was excited to say Zelensky is willing to accept the deal. My guess is that we, you know, today, maybe not by the end of this week, but by the middle of next week, we have a deal on Ukraine where they've signed a deal and he's starting to meet with Putin to put this thing to rest.
Yeah, I think that was a big moment, obviously. And I think that, for one thing, the fact that Democrats, the biggest moment of the night for them was clapping when Ukraine came up, it was definitely notable above all else. And I think as far as the whole issue itself, people have been really hysterical the last few weeks about, you know, Trump is going to sell out Ukraine or he's siding with Putin and all these things. And the meeting was a disaster. And we've seen Trump operate for long enough now to know that if you're going to micro analyze every single thing that happens, you're going to miss the forest for the trees. And I think you just kind of pointed that out, that the big picture is that he wants the conflict to end and he wants to not be spending any more American money on it. And it might be a path that isn't clear to everybody how we get there. And there might be some awkward moments along the way. But at the end of the day, that's what the end goal is. And I think that's what he's pursuing. And that's probably what Ukraine wants as well. They don't want to keep being invaded. And who knows what Russia wants, but it hasn't been a great excursion for them either. So everybody is probably going to be going the same direction here. And people need to be a little less hysterical and let Trump continue to play this process out. We thought it was a disaster. The media thought it was a disaster a week ago after the meeting. And now we find out the deal's getting signed, apparently. So that's an example that you can't just get caught up in the hysteria of the moment and have to let it play out and let the process work.
100%. Caroline, that's the thing. I said it at the time. Slow your roll. He wants a deal. Let us get to it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't blame him for not wanting this war to hang over this term. You know, it really tainted the Biden administration. And obviously it was Biden's fecklessness that invited Putin's provocation. Yeah. And Trump is a different type of guy. Trump is not afraid of, you know, our foreign foes. And he's also willing to challenge them where it's necessary. I think the big test is like, okay, do we create a national security situation where Putin is not emboldened to invade Ukraine again or to take more territory? And I mean, I think it's pretty clear that, you know, Trump is determined to keep peace, you know, in the region and keep Putin at bay. Whereas, as I said, you know, Biden is almost like, okay, we have this like puppet in the White House, like full speed ahead, you know?
Hogan, I honestly think the media is missing this story so big that he will end up getting a peace deal, that Putin will sign it. Everybody will get not everything they want, but close to it. And then they're going to turn around and go, wow, that was the guy we were yelling about, Trump.
Yeah, you the only part of that's wrong is they're not going to turn around and go, yeah, that was the guy we were yelling
Oh, yeah,
about.
Okay, fair.
Say, it's all you paved to Putin is what they're going to say. You know, interestingly enough, and watching that, we've all kind of dissected it, but he gave Zelensky a pathway to peace, at least. I mean, with a business deal for Ukraine gives them a tacit understanding that we're going to protect them to some degree because now we have business interests. Makes us less dependent on China. The American businesses now could now invest in Ukraine. I mean, it was kind of an America first deal, but it did give Zelensky some saving face to say, we got this, now let's get rid of the table. And it was handed to him on a silver, nay, golden platter because it's more Trumpian. And he just decides to throw a tantrum. We know he acted like a buffoon in that Oval Office meeting. But I do think at the end of the day, as we're starting to see, it's Trump at his best, at his finest, because he's ending up getting those people to the table. You can't have an agreement. You can't start to talk about peace unless both sides come to the table. This was the step. And now
he's the only guy that can do it. He's the only guy that can do it.
I know. And they're mad at him because they're not doing it the way it. Remember, yes, Kellen's right. Joe Biden invited it by saying, minor incursion's okay. But then he said, and we're going to fund this as long as it takes. What does that mean? No diplomacy, no off-ramp, no let's talk to Putin and bring him to the table. You were just fine sending them money? It's insane. And that's why the backlash, I think, was so jarring for the Democrat Party. And that's why I think they're so mad at Trump, because they realize he can probably get this done. And not only is he going to get done, which makes him mad, but he's doing it in a way they don't like either. That also makes him mad.
That's it. He does things that in a way that he's not sitting around with 18 PowerPoints serving tea to everybody saying, let's all get a turn to talk. He's like, let's cut it down. Bottom line, here's the deal. This is how it's going to go. You sign it, and I'm out. That's it, guys. Speaking of I'm out, what a great panel today. Thank you, guys. Dylan Hausman, Daily Caller, Caroline Downey of the National Review, and Hogan Gidley from everywhere around. Thank you guys for being here tomorrow. Great panel discussion Friday. Bill O'Reilly, who just called at CPAC President Trump the greatest president ever. I'm going to ask him why, what he's done to deserve that. Because if you recall, I asked him the same question a few weeks ago. Different answer. He said he could get there. So I want to know what changed. Bill O'Reilly on Friday. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to sign up for this newsletter, SeanSpicer.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 6. Thanks for being with us. This is the Sean Spicer Show.
The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.